Our last conversation is going to take place between Renata Avila and Paola Villarreal, who are both thinking about the future of our cities, our data within those cities, and how we can govern both. I'm so excited to welcome them both to the Open Tech and Design Summit. Hi, Paola. Hi, Renata. Thank you so much for joining me for this session. It's great to see you both.
Thank you, Geraldine. Hi, Renata. How are you?
Hello.
Paola, I would like to begin by learning a bit more about your recent work. You have such a wealth of experience. If I'm correctly informed, you already started working with the City of Mexico at the age of 17. So it's safe to say that you've been on this journey for quite some time to see how can we shape the governance of the cities that we want in future. Can you give me a little bit of an insight into where you think things are currently at, also perhaps in light of the current situation with the pandemic in regard to data management on a city, but also perhaps on a national level in Mexico?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So yeah, I've been working with Mexico's government at the National Council for Science and Technology, where we developed a project that coordinated many different researchers and scientists with the only objective to provide information for decision makers, so they could make better decisions or more informed decisions. And this was a very successful project that provided very useful information to the health ministry in particular, regarding, for instance, mathematical projections of the behavior of COVID, but also we created different indices for vulnerability in different municipalities across Mexico and different cities, of course. And yeah, we collaborated with many different local governments on the implementation of this information on the local level. So yeah, it's been super interesting. And I think now that we are seeing the end of the tunnel, or the light at the end of the tunnel, I think that we need to start to focus on the cities or the lives of people on the cities after the pandemic. So I think that's.
Can you say what are some of the topics that you think we need to start working on now in order to perhaps build the infrastructures or the frameworks to get the settings right?
Yeah, I think in terms of public policy, I think mobility and public space should be refocused. And in many cities we have very different, public spaces now after the pandemic, with restaurants going outside and stuff like that. But in terms of technology, I think for many different companies and many organizations, the pandemic meant that people went more online, and the behaviors changed, and how you communicate with people and why you communicate with people online changed. So we need to think about that and to perhaps prepare in case these behaviors changed, right? Like maybe perhaps, I don't know, like perhaps people just want to go outside instead of using the internet. But I don't know, like it's going to be a super interesting time to see how technology or what's the impact of technology on our lives.
Yeah, I feel like we're at it always kind of feels like there's a transition point for the last 20 years at least, but the sort of race at the moment, because at least this is how I observe the situation in Germany. Big tech corporations have been making city politics and data politics on their own grounds, and due to their really strong lobby powers, which I feel you can feel on a state and on a federal level in Germany quite strongly, are creating facts. So whilst governments and civil society are still trying to figure out how to form a new social contract, especially when it comes to sharing data on a city level, the big corporations are kind of creating facts along their rules. I know that's something that you're also thinking about and working on, Renata. What may be your thoughts on that, and also where do we have opportunities to come in on this?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about a trend that I see, which is more surveillance, of course. Like in Mexico, for instance, there was a recent approval of a, how do you say that? Like they ask you to provide your fingerprint and your iris, and so you cannot, in case you want to obtain a phone number, right? Like in case you want to have a contract, you need to provide those pieces of information to the government. There's no way to know what's going to happen to that data. Yeah, I think that's super concerning. And I really wish that we have a more open policy type of government, right? Like where we know what's exactly going to happen to that information, and it's discussed with experts and communities, because I also think that in this, like because of the pandemic, because we are in an emergency, right? Like in some cases, governments have used that as an excuse to stop discussing issues with communities and with experts, right? Like they say, hey, we are in an emergency, we're going to fast track this law because we need it for security purposes or for health purposes, and that's it, right? So I think we need to start looking at the, like the outcomes of the pandemic, not only in terms of health, but also in terms of surveillance, and the impact of technology in general in our societies.
Renata, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I want to share that Paola is part of an initiative I'm also part of, is the Alliance for Inclusive Algorithms. And something that our big focus right now there has been social protection. And, like how can, is there any window where AI or automation or like, these big data sets can do anything good for the people? And if it's not, how can we expose this, absence of the pieces? But while studying that, I started like looking at all north and south, what was going on. And to be honest, I think that the trend, I think that the division more than mean the global north and the global south at this point is the private sector and the public sector. And so many times that debate is neglected, because I think that we are in a transition period where working for the government is like a bad word. And the best minds of our generation are like dedicating and devoting their minds to build yet the next internet startup that will be eaten alive by Silicon Valley, basically, or by its equivalent in Europe, in China. And so all this innovation goes to that place, basically. And nobody is innovating in the public sector except exceptional people dedicating, putting their hearts on it, because there's no option, there's no private option. So I think that I would actually like, us to turn our heads on what happened to even the most developed countries, because I hate that, like we always like do this artificial division of developing countries and developed countries, where when we come to technology used by the public sector, sometimes the so-called developing countries have like this, like, science fiction like control and monitoring centers that are like with the edgy technologies to surveil and control, as Paola described. And so in that line, what I observed during the pandemic and during this time is the rapid privatization of the public sector via digitization. So I think that there was a complete opportunistic takeover by private corporations of functions that go at the core of the public function. Health monitoring systems, health management systems, the systems to monitor the movements of people, like emergency control centers, like each and every Silicon Valley company was ready to jump in and offer this series of techno-solutionism that Evgeny Morozov describes very well in packages to Europe, even, to Europe, to Latin America, everywhere. And so many times for free, just to get ahead and get exactly all the data they want. And not only the data, but it is beyond the data, because it is privatizing infrastructure so to create dependence. Basically, they are giving the gram of cocaine to the governments to keep them addicted, And
we're seeing that so strongly right now, of course, in the health sector, the whole debate about patents and vaccines and everything attached to that. But also in general, across all sectors, the stronghold of the idea that this is the only way that innovation can happen, otherwise the world is going to stagnate and stop, yeah? And how do we then break that open, that narrative?
There's a very good experience, and it's Mexico's experience. And I don't want to be, or to sound nationalistic, but at the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, we decided that we wanted to build the capacities inside the government with public officials, right? Like I no longer work at Mexico's government, but I was a public official, and I created a team with public officials, right? And the researchers and scientists I mentioned were scientists from public research centers, right? So I also think that in this case, we were very successful at strengthening the public sector, right? And I think this experience proves that you can innovate inside government. It's hard. It's super hard, but with dedication and with a little bit of strategic thinking and technical capacity, I think it's quite possible to innovate this. And I wish that other countries also have this type of experience, especially especially countries in the global south. And I think it's one of the keys why Mexico has been, to an extent, successful at controlling the pandemic, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. I guess there are like sort of glimpses of hope in different places of the world, and things happening in Taiwan, or perhaps also in Toronto, or perhaps in a small way in Europe and Barcelona, give like a little bit of an idea of how it could be done. But again, I feel like we're in this race at the moment. We're currently devising our smart city strategy for the city of Berlin, and I think the crunchy points are only going to be ahead of us when it really comes to redefining some of the contracts that exist of how the city gets to access infrastructure data and other data that is currently completely privatized with very little understanding of why it should be public good.
I would like to add to that, it's very important to, there was a trend 10 years ago, even more, of participatory budgeting in Brazil and Latin America, different places. We did experiments. And it was this very intense thing of democracy. The person who writes the rules of how you acquire the services is the one holding the power. Not necessarily the mayor even, is the one, writing the specifications. There's a lot of power in procurement guidelines. And that's what we are like looking into at Women at the Table, and then this A+ Alliance initiative on how to rewrite those rules. But I will go one step further, we need to involve people. When you are deciding technology interventions at the city level, I think that citizen participation, the people who will be affected by that technology, should be a part of the conception of the initiatives. And so, there's this frame that we have been working on called the Tech We Need. And it's very simple, it's nothing fancy. It's putting writing in the procurement rules that before any decision goes ahead, even if before the program is approved, a little bit like when you build a new park or build a new building in a neighborhood, you call the people in the community, you sit down with them and you tell them, you know, like, this is what we want to do. This is the system that we want to build. And people will have a say on that. And when you consult with the people affected, you say like, okay, and what, you explain which data you are getting and why and what for. And then they will ask, but why do you need to collect that kind of thing? You know, like it's a collaborative process. And but at the end of the day, we need to remember that they are the people we need to serve. And that's what that's the difference point, the differentiated point with the private sector. That's one thing. And the other thing is we need to be very, very, very cautious on designing and deploying technology for emergencies. I think that we need to go back a little bit, like, you know, be a little bit nationalistic on it, because I think that the relaxation when an emergency happens and the deployment of this emergency tech that then it is like the default tech is very dangerous. I'm very worried at the moment with public education and the platforms that everybody started using on it. You know, the data mining on children, it has been unbelievable. And it belongs to, in many places, to cities to regulate that. So, yeah.
Yeah, we saw a lot of that here because we don't have public infrastructure that works in place. People fall back to things like corporate solutions that are not really conform. And then, of course, we have very strict data regulation. So there's this huge conflict between the platforms that exist that are possible to use and the broken public sector platforms that might be data conform but cannot be used. So again, it's this kind of race to create public sector infrastructure and public sector information innovation that we need before all these systems are sort of presented to us by big tech and it's too hard to get out of their lockout situation, perhaps. To close with, you already mentioned some of the initiatives that you're currently working on to think these concepts further. I know we're all busy thinking about things like we were talking about data sharing treaties, about tiered access for communities, for public good. Maybe to close with, what are some of the other key things you're thinking about to bring us to that more desirable future and some of the initiatives you're currently working on?
Yeah, I think one of the key issues that we must put attention in is the algorithmic justice. Like, how do we use algorithms in the criminal justice system in many places around the world? And this touches with what Renata was saying about, involving communities that are going to be affected by these algorithms on the design of the algorithms themselves. And I think this is super, super important because in many cases we are seeing systems being developed by people from, India and being deployed in Latin America, right? And of course, the programmer from India doesn't have the context or the local context of people in Latin America. So I think it's very, very important that we are more inclusive and more open to collaboration and to also being able to implement global technologies in a local context. And that's, I will go a step further to what Renata was saying. And it's not only communities, but it's also programmers and systems developers, right? Like, I think it's very important that that the systems that affect us are built in our local context. And I also think that this is a very good opportunity to strengthen the public sector and to reinforce the debate public versus private, right? And I really believe that these types of systems should be developed by the public sector, rather by governments that have accountability and are, governed by laws. Because if we give access to companies that provide us with a black box algorithm, we lose a lot of control and we lose a lot of accountability. And in the case of the criminal justice system, this means, for instance, that a judge can say, hey, I didn't decide if you went to jail or not. It was the algorithm. So they will renounce their accountability, right? And they will excuse themselves and like say it was the algorithm. And we cannot, as a society, and I think we can all agree on that, to allow that. So yeah, that's one thing I'm currently
I think it would be interesting to see what happens in Europe on that front in regard to the proposal that Margarete Vestager just put out, and the plans to control AI that way, that are far-reaching in some way, but not really in others. Renata, anything to add from your side that you're currently thinking about and working on?
Oh yes, I have a wish list. You know,
please.
You know, the green feminist tech New Deal, basically. I want these systems to be inclusive by design, feminist and green by default. I want the best minds of our generation and those to come to go back to the public sector and, you know, like replace the, you know, like the skeletons that are living skeletons inside, or help the people really working on the really harsh conditions that the austerity measures imposed on us in the last 20 years had generated in the public sector. Get it back. It is ours. It is the only space that we count on, basically. I want those in charge of budgets to fund it properly. You know, like I want to have a job in the public sector that recognizes my preparation, my education, and my effort and intelligence. And I want that to be like a movement across, let's not say north and south, across as many democratic cities as possible, and then growing bottom up. You know, like I want this collaboration to be open source, to be free software by default, of course, but more than just sharing the code, sharing the practices and learning from the differences is going to be key. And I want all, like, you know, really make it diverse in that sense, you know, like, and that's a dream. And I hope that we can make it true. And I hope that next year, you Republica people, we can sit down and have a longer conversation about it with Paola and Geraldine. Thank you.
I would love that so much. And I share this dream, Renata. Thank you so much for voicing it so on point. I know it's going to be a long haul, but I look forward to working towards this dream together with the two of you. And thank you so much for being part of Republica this year. I do hope that we can share a stage together and welcome you in Berlin next year.
Thank you so much, and very nice meeting you, Geraldine.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.